Here's what we know so far. JPEGs come straight out of the camera, and they're small files. That means those files transfer quickly. Those files are written quickly. Those files are able to be copied quickly. RAW files are literally 3 times the size when we create them. That means they're going to transfer slower. They're going to take more battery power for transferring in the field slower. They're going to be longer in order to pull into some sort of processing. And of course, they need to be processed because a RAW file is not a photograph. I can't take a RAW file and send it to my lab and say, hey, please make me a 16 by 24 size inch print of this. No. Well, what is the quality difference between RAW and JPEG? Great question. Let me show you some prints. Earlier today, I took the 2 files that you see, and I sent them to the lab here. We're at Buckeye Color Lab in beautiful Canton, Ohio. And guess what I did? I told them to take my files, don't do any retouching at all to the files, and make me a 16 by 24 inch borderless print. So on the left, we have our that's our RAW file. On the right is going to be the JPEG file. Now, you're viewing this through a video camera, and we've got, of course, color-corrected video lights here, but you're not seeing all the differences that I'm seeing with my eye. Now, if I view those prints at standard viewing distance, right, 4 to 6 feet away, I can't see very much difference in them at all. I do see the JPEG has a little more contrast. I do see that the JPEG has a little more color saturation. I do see here that the RAW file that was converted to a JPEG, and then both of these were printed at the lab with no color corrections, I do see that the RAW file seems to have just a little more detail to it. Is it any sharper? No, the sharpness is literally the same. But we do notice that the JPEG itself has lots of color to it. I shot this at ISO 5000 with the high color saturation activated on the camera. So the color saturation of this actually is very high. Well, on the RAW file, but please remember, if you're only shooting RAW files, particularly in environments where you're completely in control, like in the studio on basic type of portraits, you're wasting a lot of time. And if that's what you want to do, that's totally cool. And oh, you know, Will, I can automate my RAW workflow so it's just as fast as JPEG. No, you can't. I can literally take the setup that you see right here, and I can shoot a picture. And let me show you. I've got a camera, a light, and a color checker chart. That's a color. Dave, come in a little closer, will you? This is a color checker passport, and it's one of the tools that we use for my consulting business to actually create images. And this is one of the ways that we can really hold a RAW versus JPEG test's feet to the fire. Can it really reproduce this gradient of colors? Well, the answer is heck yeah, it can. So if we have a color checker chart, good quality professional camera, and a nice looking light, we have the ability to make a RAW file as well as make a JPEG file. And did you know that if I set this all up correctly, I can literally shoot a JPEG, I can move it from my camera to a compact flash card, or I can just wirelessly send it to the lab, move it to the big printers in the back of the lab here, and I can get a print that I can hold right next to that, and the color's going to match just fine. Really, that fast. No Photoshop, no processing in Lightroom, no processing in Capture One or whatever you want to do. Now, if I shot a RAW file, I'd have 2 things in the way, wouldn't I? If I shoot a RAW file of that, I'm going to have to use a processor in order to make that RAW file into a photograph that the lab can print. That RAW file processor is going to impart its own flavor. Now, yes, we can automate it and have it process in a normal resulting JPEG, but what we'll find out is if I use Photoshop or Photoshop version 7 versus CS4, you're going to see a difference between the RAW file converted into a JPEG on those 2 pieces of software. That brings us to another interesting point. Which RAW processor do we use? Well, and then after your monitor, it's going to go to some sort of printer. Well, the colors are going to be translated value-wise from your camera to your monitor to your printer by the language of sRGB. Well, let me show you what it looks like. Say we were to take a photo, a color photo, nice and vivid. Here's a shot that I did of a famous artist down in New Orleans. You'll see vivid greens, rich blacks, bright whites, skin tones, as well as a bright reddish orange color on his shirt. How would you like to see the pixels of that? You want to? Watch, I'll show you. Here's our spinning sRGB color space, and let's take a look at the pixels of that last photograph. Here they are inside our color space. Isn't that crazy? Look inside there. Those are 17 megapixels, 17 million pixels, all described carefully by the color space of the sRGB. Let me get rid of the color space and let me show you just the pixels. And look, you'll see the color of them. Remember the green wall? There's the green wall. There's the millions of pixels that make up the green wall. Remember our subject's skin tones? There they are right there. Remember the red color of our artist's t-shirt? There it is there. Remember all those dark black pixels? They're right down here. They're all clumped down. Remember the white ones from the wall? Look at that. They're right there, aren't they? Sure, there you go. Millions of pixels, all described by the sRGB color space. And guess what? They're described correctly. Will they make us a great print? Yeah, you know why? Because all the millions of pixels that I created with that image are tucked inside that sRGB balloon, because every pixel needs to be inside that color space in order for them to be properly described. Well, what happens if the pixels go outside the color space? Uh-oh, those are called out-of-gamut pixels, and that's a big problem. You know why? Because they're no longer described. Their color description no longer exists. That's a big deal. Why? Well, that causes us problems. Let's take another look here. Say we were to take a look at the computer, and let's look at our sRGB color space. There it is again. Now, what is the color space of our monitor? Well, the monitor that I'm using right here today, this is an Apple laptop, and this is what the color space of the Apple laptop, 17-inch, one of the newer versions of the laptop, look like. This color space was recorded by some of my big i1 color profiles.